the natural habitat of the island, and particularly to improve the deer habitat. It was entirely covered by eucalyptus on one side. Now, I don't know if you guys are aware, but eucalyptus are non-native. I was just in Australia a few weeks ago. I went to a eucalyptus forest. It's lush. It was like being in a redwood forest. There was stuff on the ground. There were plants on the ground. And there are these really cute little bears that live in the trees, those little koala bears. I mean, they were just adorable. And they eat the leaves, and 20% of their body energy is spent digesting the toxins in those eucalyptus leaves. Now you take those trees and you bring them here to California. There are no cute little bears living in them. There are no species who can handle the toxins, and the ground underneath them is completely empty and devoid. Okay, it is a nuke zone. They are toxic trees, and they are like Roman candles full of oil. So no species grow in eucalyptus. I mean, some monarch butterflies will use them for roosting, but that's about it. And they burn easily. So there's very little value from a park perspective. We consider them bad weeds and we want them out. So we wanted to cut all the eucalyptus down at Angel Island. A group in Marin County formed themselves and called themselves POET, Protect Our Eucalyptus Trees. They were incensed that we would cut trees, especially beautiful eucalyptus. How dare you? They sued us. It's Marin County. Too many lawyers, too much money, too much time. They sue us on everything. And so we finally got rid of most of them. And of course, the island looks great now. And you ride around the island, and you all should go to Angel Island because it's a really fun trip. And you get the best views of San Francisco. But it's because the ukes are gone. It used to be you couldn't see anything. But it's just that kind of example where landscapes and every little space is special to everybody. So you tread at your own peril. Okay, so here's some design responses to some of these trends. Demographic trends. We have new populations, Hispanics, Asians, others who did not grow up in a camping tradition. So we're starting to create alternative camping, cabins like that. Those are up at MacArthur Bernie Falls. They're just like hard tents. You go inside that thing, there's no electricity, there are bunk beds and a pad. But what we found is we're now getting a lot more Asians and East Asians using that park than we ever used to get. Since not everybody owns a tent, not everybody knows how to use a tent, it used to be that was the only way you could stay the night at Bernie Falls was in a tent. Now you have a dozen of these cabins, and they're always full. I put them in because I thought we would be helping single moms, because I knew single moms didn't want to camp because they don't feel safe. That's not the big cohort using it. It's a whole new ethnic group that we didn't even realize had demand or interest, and I think they're finding out through their own web viral, Facebook and social media, because we don't do any marketing on these things. The other demographic group are seniors. A lady came up to me and told me, "You gave me my park back." She said, "We used to stay at Bernie Falls every year for 20, 30 years. All my family, my kids, every year we went to stay at Bernie Falls. I'm now 80 years old. I cannot sleep on the ground. I could no longer go to Bernie Falls. Now you've given it back to me. I can go again." So that was sort of a surprise to me. I wasn't thinking it was something that the seniors would like, because they're so rustic, and like I said, no electricity. Very popular, and so it's just a way to kind of expand it. Down below you see is group camping. We find we have to completely redesign our campgrounds and our park areas now for especially group cooking. Hispanics like to recreate in large family groups, and so you've got to have facilities that will accommodate large family groups. The other interesting thing I'm noticing also with a lot of Caucasians is they will camp with groups of friends. So people are all having to kind of reserve a bunch of contiguous sites and figure out how to game the system so that you kind of create your own group site. Because all of our campgrounds are designed in that 1930s, 40s thing, which is a single spur for 1 or 2 cars and that family. And so while it works for people to reserve a bunch of contiguous sites, a lot of them have a lot of bushes in between, because that's what people liked, was privacy. But now that they're a big group site that they just sort of created through the reservation system, they're all walking across it and you start to trample all the bushes, and so you can kind of see how you start getting some interesting conflicts. The solution is a design one. The use has changed, so you got to change the design. You need group, picnic, and cooking areas. We're repurposing historic sites. The interesting story, that's Angel Island. When that park was bought by State Parks, we took on Angel Island in the 50s. It's a beautiful cove there, and it's the one cove that's sheltered from the elements. San Francisco's always cold, it's always windy. But if you go to that side of Angel Island, it's sunny, it's warm, and it's sheltered from the wind. So it was a perfect place to put in a campground. So they were going to knock down all the historic buildings and put up a campground. And in that building, the ranger, his name was, I think it's Alan Weiss, and he was going through the building. It was going to be demolished, and he was just sort of doing an inspection, and he had his flashlight. And he flashed his light on the walls, and he noticed some Chinese carvings. And he went, oh, well, that's kind of weird. And then he flashed it more and more, and he saw carvings all the way up and down a lot of the walls. So he called a friend of his who was Chinese and said, what is this? And his friend came over and started reading the Chinese and said, these are poems. These are poems that people are saying of what their experience was while they were being incarcerated at Angel Island, because the history of our country was we welcomed a lot of immigrants to Ellis Island on the New York side. People would come through, get processed, and in a day they were in New York. On the California side, Europeans, if they were coming through our side, were processed in a day, Russians and the rest. But Chinese, there was a Chinese exclusion law. They were held back, interrogated, and there was a very, very rigorous set of questions that they had to be able to answer correctly in order to get through, and many of them were sent back. So it was a really ugly phase of our history. And so people would be sometimes imprisoned in there as much as 6 months. And, well, detained, I guess, is the word that they use. So it wasn't like a concentration camp, but it was detention, and they were not legally allowed to go anywhere. So they carved all these poems on the walls. So then the ranger got more of his friends from a university, and then sort of a movement started to build up. And so then he was now going against his whole department, because remember, his department wanted to knock the whole thing down and turn it into a campground. So I think to the credit of the department, even back then, they realized they had a historic story here that they hadn't even realized. And so we just spent $15 million restoring that thing a few years ago. And now you can go in there, and there's special lighting on the poems, and then there's translations for the poems, and you can actually see what people were writing. And it's not just Chinese, there's also Sanskrit and several other languages that were engraved there as people were being incarcerated. So it's a very powerful story. We call it the Ellis Island of the West. But it's an example how we repurposed a building for a very different reason than what we originally thought we'd use it for. And then this one here, this is a trend, not so much in California state parks, but it's one I wanted to highlight for you because cities and counties are doing this. This is sort of taking natural play areas and creating great fun places for kids to play. But this one is a play off of a historic boat called Bonnie the Boat. It's at the Discovery Museum in Sausalito. But another thing that's happening a lot is they're creating nature play areas. So if you go to your typical green belt here in California, at least in Davis, you'll see the usual sort of wood shavings and then those kind of boring structures that kids get to play on. And so there's starting to be a departure from that, and people are trying to create areas where kids can come and have unstructured play with nature. And so you're seeing a lot of use of wood, pine cones, leaves, rocks, just things for kids to play with, which don't require, that's not sort of pre-programmed. I mean, those structures, there's not a lot of imaginative play that can be done in those things. And so that's kind of a really interesting trend, and there's companies now that are building these nature play areas. There's a lot more sort of email traffic on this, and I'm starting to see cities and counties starting to install them. We issue a lot of grants in California, and one of the things we're getting a lot of grant requests for is creating these new nature play areas. It's, again, trying to arrest that trend where kids are sitting in front of a screen and nobody's playing outside. We're realizing kids need unstructured play. It's very important for their mental development. A lot of design issues you're going to deal with is the American with Disabilities Act. We were sued. We had to spend $11.5 million a year making our parks accessible. It's a 15-year lawsuit, and so $11 million a year over 15 years. So if you are designing anything for any public entity that you will work for in the future, you better follow ADA. And it can be real challenging with historic places, and how do you make a redwood trail ADA, and do you have to make all the trails ADA? And so the answer is you have to create an experience for everybody in each park. You don't have to make every single trail ADA, but you do. It is definitely something that's a trend of making places more accessible. The good news about it is that when you make something accessible for a wheelchair, you've just now made it a lot easier for those seniors. Remember, big demographic group makes it a lot easier for them to get there too, because the slopes are so carefully measured. We're using a lot more technology in our parks. Kids are spending all their time in front of a screen. There's no point in trying to trash talk technology. You might as well try to use it. So the way we're doing, this is actually a light show that we were beaming in one of our parks in downtown LA. We are now using